Bom dia, gata preta, e bem-vindos a todos ao show de Andrés Soto. I have just returned from a 5-week journey through Portugal. Portugal? Most people I've spoken to, they ask me, why Portugal? The answer is many reasons. Me and my wife, Kat, traveled to 7 different cities in 5 weeks. We traveled to small, medium, and large cities. We went on a day trip to Vigo, Spain. We rode a local train into the Douro River Valley in the heart of the Portuguese wine country. We went with our eyes open to seeing what it was like to be in a socialist country with a colonial past. What was income distribution like on the streets? What were race relations like in a society with changing demographics? Did the Catholic Church have any role in this historically Catholic country? How is Portugal managing the climate crisis? What are the state of Portuguese politics? Of course, we're looking to learn the Euro-Portuguese language, savor the relatively unknown Portuguese food and wine, and explore ancient sites and take in the beautiful Portuguese coastline. Today, I will share reflections of this trip to Portugal with you, and perhaps you will be interested in visiting or moving to Portugal. All of this and some very cool music. This is El Show de Andrés Soto on KPFA 94.1 FM in Berkeley. Sí se puede. All power to the people.
O fado para mim conta muito. Fado e música portuguesa. Agora bandas de rock e isso. Há umas que eu gosto de ouvir, mas para mim é o fado. Adoro, por acaso adoro.
Vamos cantar agora.
Vamos cantar agora.
Coimbra do Chopal, ainda és capital do amor em Portugal. Dessa Inês tão linda, Coimbra das canções, tão meiga que nos pões nos nossos corações a nu. Coimbra dos doutores, para nós os teus cantores, a fonte dos amores és tu. É uma lição de sonho e tradição. O lento é uma canção e a lua a faculdade. O livro é uma mulher, só passa quem souber e aprende-se a dizer saudade. Coimbra do Chopal, ainda és capital do amor em Portugal ainda. Coimbra onde uma vez com lágrimas se fez a história dessa Inês tão linda. Coimbra das canções, tão meiga que nos pões nos nossos corações a nu. Para nós os teus cantores, a fonte dos...
Yes, the beautiful song Coimbra e uma lição, and that was from the group Fado ao Centro. And of course, Fado is an historic music within Portugal, not the only music in Portugal, but it's certainly a central part of it. And I came to learn that Coimbra has its own special form of Fado. And so, I wanted to share some of the things I learned and some of the things I saw on this trip, because I think it would be interesting to the KPFA audience. But before that, I want to give out a big shout out, a special thanks to the Listening Project of the Richmond Progressive Alliance and the collective of young people in Richmond who filled in with programming while I was gone. And I hope that you learned a lot more about Richmond through the eyes of the Listening Project of the Richmond Progressive Alliance. So thank you guys so much for filling in and helping out while I was gone. So the background of the trip was, I have been looking for many years to look at different socialist countries and which ones, could be a place that would be a nice place to live, given the state of the United States and its track as a declining empire. It's got a lot further to go down before it's going to build up and get better. One thing interesting about Portugal is, of course, it was one of the major colonial powers during the so-called Age of Discovery. And like most of those colonial powers, like Spain and Portugal and eventually even the United Kingdom and others, their colonies, their colonial activities, France, all started to fall apart. With independence movements, with the establishment of forms of democracy and aspirations of democratic rule by former colonies, what we saw was Portugal went through several waves of this, including the loss of their largest colony, Brazil. And at one point, the king of Portugal, actually abdicated the throne to become the emperor of Brazil. He bailed. They went through 3 civil wars and ultimately ended up with a military dictatorship starting in the 1930s, the so-called Novo Estado, or the new state, under the dictator Dr. Oliveira Salazar. That dictatorship lasted, the longest one in Western Europe, until 1974. And on April 25th, 1974, a military coup by young military officers who were tired and frustrated with the failures of the colonial wars in Angola, in Guinea-Bissau, in Mozambique, and primarily parts of Africa. They overthrew the government. It was bloodless. It's known as the Carnation Revolution because the people poured into the street. It was carnation season, and they distributed carnations to the people, to the soldiers, and famously put carnations in the barrel of the guns. There were no deaths associated with this coup, and since these were leftist soldiers, they turned it over to civilians, and within 2 years they had set up a federal republic. And it has been operating as a left or center-left government ever since. Currently, the government is operated by a coalition of 3 parties, led by the Socialist Party, which is a leftist party, in coalition with the Green Party and the Communist Party of Portugal. This is the ruling coalition. They have just had snap elections in January, and the government was re-elected for the 3rd time. It is led by a gentleman named Antonio Costa, who is of Indian Portuguese descent, and so very distinctively a brown man as the head of their government. So looking at Portugal from that perspective, I had never been. I grew up with Portuguese in the city of Sao Paulo, and I felt that, as a destination, as a potential living space, what would Portugal be like? And so Kat and I planned, and decided that we're going to try to get a range of Portuguese experiences. As we planned our trip, we decided we were going to be looking at the northern two-thirds of the country and examine it city by city and make assessments of what are the pluses and minuses of each of these different cities. And so we started our trip, looking at where are we going to stay, how are we going to move about. And one of the things we did was participate with Airbnb. That's how we got our places. We wanted to have a kitchen so that we could go shopping and do cooking in our places with the wonderful Portuguese food that we had heard about and then came to experience. We also decided that we wanted to use public transportation as much as possible. And Portugal being a relatively small country with a very, very strong public transit infrastructure, it worked out really good. The whole country of Portugal, if you look at the latitude of it, it is on the southwestern corner of the Iberian Peninsula of Western Europe and just above the country of Morocco in North Africa. And latitudinally, the country of Portugal, if you put it on the map of California, it would overlay essentially from Santa Cruz in the south up to Crescent City, almost the Oregon border in the north. And then it goes in about 400 miles at the north and 200 miles in the south. So it is a relatively small country physically, with a tremendous history. And that is reflected in the architecture. It's reflected in the art. One of the things that you first experience if you start out as we did in Lisbon is the presence of what they call azulejos. So these are hand-painted tiles that are then, kilned and glazed, and they use it as a wall covering. So all around the country, you see these buildings that are covered in these beautiful tiles. And in some of the places, like in the São Bento, the main train station in Porto, it is world famous for the different scenes, sort of like the Portuguese history greatest hits in azulejos that are inside the main lobby of that train station. And so this is the beginning of understanding that the Portuguese people are very much into art, and they have public art all over the place. Another feature of socialist countries where the government helps pay for public art, whether it's statues, whether it's art shows, whether it's poetry readings, whether it's musical performances. The government is helping to subsidize all these activities because it helps bring the people together, helps celebrate the culture of the community, and creates unity within the community. And so, as I said, we started out in Lisboa, and one of the things about Portugal and the Portuguese people is that they are the second highest per capita consumers of fish and seafood in the world, behind Icelanders. So needless to say, things like fish and seafood are on the menu throughout Portugal in many, many different preparations, and most famously the product bacalhau, which is North Atlantic codfish that are caught and then processed and preserved in salt and dried out until they're like a block of wood. And this fish is reconstituted through several washes of water, and then cooked as a fresh fish, and prepared in, as they say, more than 365 different ways. So I'm here telling you today, this is Andres Soto, and thank you for tuning in to El Show de Andres Soto. And I'm sharing some reflections on a recent trip to the country of Portugal, and reasons why you may be interested in checking out Portugal, particularly if you are a self-identified socialist. But I wanted to remind you that you are listening to El Show de Andres Soto here on 94.1 KPFA in Berkeley, 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and online at kpfa.org. We're going to take a brief music break, and this song is called Grandola Villa Morena by Seca Afonso, and I will tell you the story of this song on the return.
Grandola Vila Morena, terra da fraternidade, o povo é quem mais ordena, dentro de ti a cidade, dentro de ti a cidade, o povo é quem mais ordena, terra da fraternidade, Grandola Vila Morena.
Yes, that was the tune Grandola Villa Morena by Seca Afonso. And the importance of that song is that in the last years of the dictatorship, the government was getting extremely oppressive, and one of the things, of course, they did was start to ban songs, and this song was banned as being too communist-oriented, and it became one of the cues on the national radio for the military when they engaged in the coup. That was the green light to go into their operations that ultimately overthrew the government. So it went from being a song of being oppressed to one of liberating the people. And so I kind of want to run down some experiences in the journey from town to town. And we start out in Lisboa, the capital city of Portugal, the largest city in Portugal. And we were staying in the Alfama district, the oldest neighborhood in Lisbon, and it survived an earthquake in the 1700s, where some of the parts of Lisbon were rebuilt from there. But this is even older. It's all stone. It's all cobblestone streets, little alleyways that speak to the ancientness of it. But this is also the center of fado music in Lisboa. And fado is this beautiful music, usually sung by a single vocalist with accompanied by a guitar they call the Spanish guitar, guitarra española, as well as guitarra portuguesa, which is based on the English lute. It's like a 12-string mandolin. And so Lisboa is a multiracial, multicultural city. It is absorbed many different immigrants and refugees. Portugal has has done a lot and overtly promotes racial harmony, racial unity. They talk about it. They provide many different kind of services to help immigrants settle and become part of Portuguese society. It was something very beautiful to watch. And from there, we rode the train and we went up to the northern part of the country, almost near the Spanish border, to a regional city called Viana do Castelo. And this is also, like many of the cities in Portugal, the city is built on a river. And in this case, at the mouth of a river, and where, in Portugal, the topography is you have the Sierra Madre Mountains in the east, creating the Spanish-Portuguese border, and then rivers run west from there into the Atlantic Ocean. And Viana do Castelo is an old fishing village and beautiful city, very walkable, like all the Portuguese cities, very clean, and relatively not as ancient appearing, even though nearby there are ancient ruins from the Celtic people who were the original inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula, and their structures that are known as castros. And so there is a mixture of modernity and history there. And then, from there, we had a wonderful time, great food. It was a really introduction to smaller Portuguese life. We moved over to the city of Braga, which is the third largest city in Portugal, and it is the ancient center of historic Portuguese Catholicism, with the Archbishops of Portugal being based in Braga. And it happened to be the time of the year for what they call Semana Santa, or the Holy Week, and they have one of those old processions where they reenact Jesus walking through the city carrying a cross, except this one is on steel casters, making a distinctive noise over the cobblestones. But it had, reenactors of Roman soldiers and local Arabic people, as well as, brass bands with drums and, priests and the whole crew. What is interesting is that because Portugal has gone through many of these political changes, it has largely marginalized the Catholic Church. People just don't go to church anymore. There is no role for the Catholic Church in politics in Portugal. So it's a very secular society. And as such, things like the Semana Santa parade are no longer these, magnificent and emotional type of events, but has become more like a quaint tradition. And so that happened right below our window in the city of Braga. Amazing vistas in the city, history all around you, great food. So it's really something that is really one of the highlights of our trip. From there, we went down to the city of Porto, the capital or the second largest city, and where port wine was made. And so also a beautiful city, a lot of history, wonderful waterfront, great restaurants on both sides of the river. On the south side of the river from Porto is the city of Vila Nova de Gaia, where they do all the port wine houses. So tremendous also metro systems, underground train systems in both Lisbon and Porto. And I also got to play jazz at the Hot 5 Jazz Club in Porto. Tremendous musicians in Portugal, and it was a great honor to play with these folks. From there, we went to a smaller town, a historic town called Aveiro, which is called the Venice of Portugal because of all the canals and the canal boats they have there. Salt manufacturing is a historic industry there. Very flat, very walkable, great fish fish market, great seafood restaurants all over the place. Highly recommended place to relax. From there, we went to Coimbra, which is one of the older cities in Portugal and the center of the University of Coimbra, which is the second oldest university in Europe after Milano. And as such, historically, it attracted a lot of Jewish folks who became victims of the Spanish Inquisition. It is not remembered, but Coimbra is now a university town, a student town. It's a major part of the social, cultural life there. And it's also a beautiful riverfront city with a large and well-featured riverfront park on both sides of the park, but especially on the river, but especially on the south side. Coimbra is a very special place. And then from there, we went down to Nazaré, which is now famous for the highest waves in the world for surfers. But until recently, it was a sleepy little fishing village, still is. It's got a beautiful long beach and a waterfront series of restaurants and plazas and bars, and they are just about ready to have the World Cup beach soccer tournament there. Nazaré, beautiful place. A lot more people are going there now and learning Portugal because of Nazaré. And we wrapped up our trip in Lisboa and spent a couple days there before we came home. One of the things that you get there is no guns. Police don't have guns. There's hardly any cops. Our whole trip there, we never heard anything, no sirens except for ambulances. And so, Peter, go ahead and put down the cushion now. And we're going to have some music as a cushion as I wrap up my remarks here. This is Véspera by Sexteto de Jazz de Lisboa. But in conclusion, Portugal shows that you can have a socialist democracy that works on behalf of the people and puts the needs of the people first and still maintain your culture. People there are very calm. There was no real arguing or fighting. People work together and help each other. You can really feel the love, and they are very warm and welcoming. In Portugal, the second most common language is actually English. And just like the Dutch have a thing about Germans, the Portuguese have a thing about Spaniards. So they would rather speak to you in English than Spanish. Euro-Portuguese is actually very similar to Euro-Spanish. That helps make it, that adjustment for folks who do speak some Spanish. But in the end, looking at how socialism has converted their society, where people are taken care of, universal health care, national rent control, national eviction control, all these things are in place, and it's a place you may want to consider. Portugal. It's wonderful. And with that, I just want to say, if you want to share any ideas, contact me, Andres Soto, at andres@kpfa.org. And with that, I say muito obrigado to Peter Stickney on the board, and muchísimas gracias to all of you, the listeners. And remember, you are part of the solution.
Know what's going on around KPFA? On the Deck is the monthly video announcement series hosted by me, Miko Tolliver, where I give you program updates, info on our live events calendar, and interviews about show hosts and station history. Visit the front page of our station website at www.kpfa.org and stay current on all things KPFA.
listening to 94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, 97.5 K248BR in Santa Cruz, 94.3 K232FZ in Monterey, and online worldwide at kpfa.org.